Hello and welcome to Hot Topics Mzansi, where we bring you the latest trending topics, celebrity news, and speculation. Now, the long-awaited interview with aka Keenan Forbes and Thembekile finally took place this evening. So this video is going to give a review of what went down, parts that raised brows, and some things we did not know about Nelly. So I'm going to try and break it into sections: the space that AKA is in now, events and moments leading up to the tragedy. I'm going to chat a little bit about their relationship issues, age difference, for example. I'm going to talk about the abuse allegations, the mental health issues in the relationship, and finally, some troubling comments and events before and at the funeral, as well as lastly on the inquest that is currently taking place. So very informal, and let's speculate together. As I share my speculations and thoughts, please leave your comments below, and perhaps you have some unanswered questions. I'd love to read those as well. So let's get into it. So the interview started off with AKA detailing that he is really struggling to function and find himself right now. In fact, he used the words, I'm floating from moment to moment. He says that he's struggling to mourn, obviously, because he's in the public eye. There's publications about him. There's videos being leaked about him. So he seems to be having sleepless nights. But he did emphasize from the beginning of the interview that he loved and cherished Anele, and that he wants to preserve her name and uphold it, and that he didn't want to answer for her. So when he was asked about, was Anele on drugs, was she unstable in that regard, he blatantly refused to answer any of those types of questions in her honor. Now, events and moments leading up to the tragedy. He detailed that a week before they had been arguing like you won't believe. And he said that on that evening when they went to perform in Cape Town, they had a great day. They did some shopping. They were in a great mood, but when they got back to the hotel room, they decided to start talking and doing some introspection and to really talk about the problems they had in their relationship, which is apparently what they had been discussing those previous weeks about, we've got these hectic issues that we need to iron out. But it seems like the argument and the disagreement just went on and on for hours that evening. It got so bad to a point where Anele took off her ring and she threw it at him. And he mentions that mean things were said, and that in the middle of all this fighting, and he mentions in the interview that the argument they were having just kept escalating from, degree to degree and getting worse, and that at some stage, she then says, I'm going to kill myself. And that's when he decided, I need to call security. But he said something interesting about having then removed himself from the situation. That when she started making these death threats and suicidal threats, he decided, I don't think I can handle this. And earlier, some people on Twitter were saying, but how can you remove yourself from that situation, dude? How can you say you need to go to the bathroom and take a breather when your girlfriend is saying she's gonna go to the balcony and literally jump over? So those are some interesting questions there. But when really asked about it, why he had left her alone, he says he didn't really believe she'd do it because apparently Anele had threatened to kill herself numerous times in her relationship. At some stage, she was removed off of a ledge from Hilton Hotel in Durban. In another point in their relationship, she tried to jump off a moving car. And so he says, he'd heard all of this, and I suppose in that moment he was also frustrated, and he thought, there she goes again. And well, turns out she actually did jump. And so when he went back, she was not there. What do you think about that? What would you have done if your fiance, actually wife, because he emphasizes in the video, in the interview, that this is my wife. He had paid lobola fully, meaning that according to customary law, they were actually married. Ku tricky, ku rough. When it comes to their relationship issues, AKA told to Thembekile that both of them were very passionate people, and he even admitted to having a tumultuous relationship. That's the word he used. Now, I went to the Oxford Dictionary via Google to find out what exactly tumultuous means, and I was particularly looking for some synonyms. Now, here are some. Well, this is a little bit of what I found from Google, that tumultuous means excited, confused, disorderly, deafening, thunderous, violent, volatile, passionate, chaotic, etc., etc. Like I said, courtesy of the Oxford Dictionary accessed via Google. And when you see these words and when you listen to these words, this sounds like a very unstable, sort of toxic, rough relationship. But who's to say that the average relationship is not tumultuous? Because he said that the issues they had were not unlike any other relationship out there. He didn't want to dig deep into the issues, but he said just like any other couple, those are the types of issues that we were dealing with. He did, however, use the word volatile in describing their personalities and their disagreements, and he said that they were both very stubborn people, and that they'd had a lot of sometimes had intense disagreements in the past. But the one issue he did mention was that there were insecurities in the relationship. Now, were these insecurities about other women? Because he mentioned that with the kind of job he has and the kind of industry he's in, these insecurities may have arisen. So the question now is, was this girl insecure, and who were the threats? Were there other females around? Was it that silly case of, AKA did a song with Shoma Josie and they happened to have a late night phone call to talk about the track, and perhaps Anele was that jealous? We'll never know. Those are just some questions that I suppose we'll have to live with. So when questioned about whether his relationship with Anela was toxic or not, he says that his relationship with her was not toxic. He mentions over and over in the interview that they were in love. They loved each other. They wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. He says that even from the beginning of their relationship, they kind of knew that they would probably end up getting married. He does admit that the age gap in their relationship was an issue sometimes. He says sometimes it was an advantage because this was a young girl and she wanted to settle down, and because he was older, he could give some direction and he knew where he was going. But he says that in terms of communication, sometimes in terms of love languages and I suppose understanding each other, there were sometimes gaps where, he felt like I'm speaking to a 20-something-year-old here. Why is she not getting me? And I suppose even maybe from her side, she sometimes felt like, dude, I'm not following what's happening here. Now, I've never been in a relationship with somebody who was 10 years my senior, but I can imagine that when there's a 10-year age difference, there are bound to be issues around, that type of thing. Look, at this stage of the interview, I was picking up that he was earnest and honest, but there was a strong sense of wanting to protect and defend himself. Now, I don't know if it's because he's feeling alone. We know now that he hasn't spoken to the Thembe family since after the day of the funeral. So is this guy feeling alone? He hasn't been hearing from them. Nobody has been making contact with him. So, in this interview, was he feeling like, I've got my back against the wall, there's nobody in my corner, it's just me, my parents, The whole world is against me. Media is posting things. Friends are coming out with pictures and videos, or allegedly. So I need to emphasize that are allegedly coming out with stuff. There are these anonymous sources and activists who are now all of a sudden trying to paint me out as an abuser and this volatile, violent man. And so it's likely that he may have been defensive at first. If you watch the interview, you'll read his body language, very defensive at first, because he just felt unsafe in that space. And then when it comes to abuse allegations, he did say that he is definitely not an abuser, and that how could he possibly abuse somebody he loved. Now, later on in the interview, he mentions how some detectives from Cape Town flew in to interview Uzinhle to ask her this very question about abuse. Has he ever hit you? And she replied, no, which I suppose clarifies all of that. However, there's a video that trended on the socials where Uneli is just hysterical, and she says, "You don't know what he's been doing to me," etc. And when Thembekile asked him about this particular video and what she meant by "you don't know what he's been doing to me," his response was blurry there. It was very unclear, but he said that we don't know the full story. And so even though their relationship looked dysfunctional from the outside and extreme, only they knew what was happening, and Uneli is not here to tell her side of the story. So that was the kind of like, I don't want to say scapegoat, but he kept alluding to that whenever he was faced with a question that I suppose he felt he didn't want to answer, didn't feel equipped to answer, etc. Also, I mean, this guy has a legal team behind him. So chances are that he was briefed by his legal team that these are the things you do not touch on. These are the terms you use to protect yourself, because obviously he doesn't want to implicate himself. Guy is already feeling like he may be a suspect, which leads me to my next point, which talks about some troubling comments and events before and at the funeral. Just talking about the police and him feeling that he could possibly be a suspect. He says that because he hasn't been updated on the inquest, no police have gotten in touch with him to say, listen, you are the husband, therefore you must know what's going on. This is how far the investigations are going. This is what we've found out. So he says, that's a little fishy. All this silence, the Forbes family is not being informed about anything, yet the Thembe family is getting all this information. Could this mean that he's a suspect? Is that how everybody is viewing him? But moving on to these troubling comments, he says that at the funeral, when asked by Thembekile, at the funeral, the father's tribute mentioned that Nelly had not committed suicide. AKA's response to that was, listen, I don't know why he said that, but he knew very well that Nelly was on antidepressants. He mentions at the same time that culturally, mental health and suicide are taboo. And I mean, being Black myself, I know that in my family there are extremely traditional people who would, if I approached them and said, listen, I was booked into a mental facility, that say to me, listen, when unamadlozi or uyasangana or uqalwe izinto zakho kakhona, and wouldn't take it seriously. So I think that was a valid point he made, and I think a lot of us Africans can relate to that. But when asked about the comment his Nelly's father made on alcohol and drug abuse being a scourge amongst young people, if you remember at the funeral, and he said that, look, it wasn't direct, but what the nation read of that tribute and that comment was, okay, the father thinks that drugs and alcohol were involved in his daughter's death. AKA says, he doesn't want to comment on that. He doesn't know why Nelly's father said that. He went and paid him a visit after the funeral. He told him exactly what had happened the night before her death. And so, that made him feel very uneasy. That made him feel like, okay, what's going on here? And then, of course, he last spoke to Nelly's father the day after the funeral, which for me is just... It's just strange. It's really, really, really strange. And there have been rumors going around that Moses Thembe has his own private investigator, doing an inquest on the side. So my question is he the suspect in the Thembe's eyes? Is that why they haven't spoken to him for so long? Is that why they haven't made, is that why there's been silence from the police? Why is it that the media knows things about this investigation that Keenan, doesn't even know? And AKA just felt like, as Nelly's husband and the person who took care of her burial, he had a right to speak at the funeral. This is now moving on to another thing he said made him feel. He says something did not feel right to him. Those are the words he used. That, listen, dude, I helped organize this funeral. I am this person's husband. Why am I not up there speaking at my wife's funeral? He says that he'd even written a eulogy for her, which I presume may come out in a song one day, because he says he'd love for people to hear what he had to say. But at the end of the interview, we realized that Moses Thembe was contacted and responded saying that no, AKA made no such request to speak at the funeral, and neither was such a request denied. We did not deny him a platform to speak. So there he went rubbishing those claims. So also very interesting there. And then lastly, the inquest. AKA mentioned that DJ Zindle had been interviewed. His main thing was, why are they interviewing my ex-girlfriend? What are they trying to say? What is the message behind the silence of the investigation, and all these types of things? And he just feels that they need to know, because he says, as much as the Thembes have lost a daughter, he's lost a wife, and his family have lost a daughter-in-law. He also says that he's now lost a potential other family, because he was going to be a son-in-law. He would have then adopted a new father in Moses Thembe. And so he feels that, look, I've lost so much as well. What's happening here? Can we be open with each other? And then lastly, when asked about his work, if he thinks that he will be able to face the crowds anytime soon, he said he can imagine that it's only when he's learned to live with this tragedy, when he's learned to fill this gaping hole inside of him, that he sees himself stepping out and performing. I mean, he pulled out of the Joburg... I forget the name now, but I'm such a fan. Joburg Day. They've got a Joburg Day festival that they host every year, 94.7. He pulled out of that, and he just says that currently he's doing therapy, and he's working through his anger towards God and his anger towards Uneli. And so he says he's slowly praying, learning to pray again, learning to find peace, and that's pretty much it from that interview. Look, how do I feel after having watched that interview? Some things don't make sense to me, particularly about why do you remember everything so clearly except for that moment when she jumps? Because there's a point where he says, she walked past me saying she is now going to jump. Why didn't you follow her? At the same time, he's gotten a response to that. He says, well, I didn't believe her. She's always talking about, allegedly committing suicide. So that's the one thing for me that just didn't make sense. Why is that moment blurry? But, look, no doubt the guy loved the girl. That's why he paid lobola. I don't think it was because she came from a wealthy family and he wanted money, because I think he's got his own money. AKA is in his early 30s. So his career is bound to flourish, or was bound to flourish. He's got endorsements behind him. He's got a huge following behind him. So I definitely don't think it's because it was a money thing. He's dated high, top-notch celebrities, Bobo Nang, Boti Jay-Z, so he could have proposed to them. So I don't think that, paying lobola for Uneli Thembe had anything to do with financial reasons or anything. But it does seem that this relationship was quite tumultuous, and I think perhaps that's where we need to start asking questions. That, did you guys drive yourselves to the point of death? Well, I'll leave it there. That's it from me, you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.